Good afternoon, everyone. This is Atmospheric Alex here, back with another severe weather outlook and discussion video. And in today's video, we're going to be discussing the upcoming severe weather chances, maybe a little bit of something for today, but especially Wednesday, as a full-blown tornado outbreak will be possible across the upper Ohio Valley into portions of the Midwest. We're going to start off the video here with our current convective outlook. We're talking about a fairly large slight risk in place here for today that is going to include the risk for severe thunderstorms. And in terms of our hazards, we only have a 2% chance for tornado, so I'm not expecting too much, though there are a few areas I'm watching a little bit, and we'll look at that when we get to our Helicity product. As we look at our wind here, we are definitely talking about some pretty good areas of wind, a 30% chance of wind non-SIG, non-hatch, so we're not expecting any gusts, particularly over 75 miles an hour today, so that is the good news. But you can see in our red areas especially is where our highest wind threat is going to be. And in terms of our hail threat, we have a few areas up there, but that is about it. Now, there's really going to be nothing else going on for the next few days, but we're going to go ahead and jump to a Wednesday here, and this is where stuff becomes very significant. We have an enhanced risk, a 30% risk for severe weather here across portions of Missouri and Illinois. I do expect this 30% risk area to get even larger, and I also expect maybe a moderate risk to be issued because you're going to go ahead and see in just a moment the models are showing some pretty big time scenarios here for Wednesday in terms of how significant our severe weather and tornadic weather could get. And then you can see our large slight risk outlining everything else. But that is not all. As we head into day 6 here, or day 5, it was day 6 yesterday, you can see we do have a large 15% slight risk here. Nothing too much to worry about yet, but we could be talking about, maybe some pretty good winds here across the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. All right, and now we're going to go ahead and take a good look at what the future radar could look like later on this afternoon into this evening. So starting off here, you can see we do have some storms down here across East Tennessee. Those are leaving the picture, though. But later on into the afternoon, you have storms firing up right over here into portions of Ohio, into portions of Ontario, Canada there, and then also further off to the southeast into, portions of, say, Pennsylvania. You've got some prefrontal storms out here, and then all this back here as well, all this junk, you do have some pop-up storms. Nothing too crazy just yet. As we continue heading later on to the afternoon into the evening, though, you're going to begin to notice some damaging wind segments forming up here in the northeast and the Mid-Atlantic. You could see two very well-defined segments there. That's why you have your 30% wind risk. You could see, a few other features down here as well. You have like a damaging wind segment there. You have one right down here as well. And then you have some pop-up storms in between, which could become strong to potentially even severe. But we're going to have to watch for that. Carrying the clock on forward, we are expecting storms to move through Pennsylvania and New York and impacting portions like New York City, potentially around 9 to 10 p.m. tonight. So that is going to be on the docket for you all. We are going to, again, have that risk of severe weather extending really all the way from Maine all the way down to portions of South Carolina and Georgia. You can see kind of this big old broken line right within here along your front. That is where severe weather will be possible, of course. And then you can see we do have some back end showers and storms being possible in some other areas going later on tonight. In terms of our ingredients, you do have sufficient dew point values here. I will note across the Northeast you have slightly less values, but that is still doable enough for significant winds. But down here you have dew points in your 60s and your 70s stretching down to East Tennessee. And then later on this evening, you can see we do have a little bit higher dew point values starting to emerge here across portions of the coastline up here, the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. We're talking dew points potentially closing in on 70 degrees. So certainly is going to be a favorable environment for severe weather, and pushing that on through, that gets a little further off to the north, and storms storms can intensify in that environment. In terms of your storm energy, we do have some of it. I do expect this to uptrend a little bit. I think the HRRR model is over mixing. It's basically, kind of mixing out your air, your moisture a little bit, making it a little drier than it should be. And that's especially prevalent here across portions of eastern Tennessee. I do think you're going to have storm energy values maybe closing in on 2,000 in some areas. Again, mainly due to the fact it has over mixing. It heats up the ground too much. It dries everything out too quickly. And that is a known bias of the model. You could see across portions of the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. I also think that is over mixing too much. We are going to have storm energy greater than 500 Cape. I mean, we definitely are in that kind of environment for sure. And as we continue to move on through, we do have a nice plume kind of emerging along the coast. You do kind of, I guess, have that sea breeze right there. But again, you're going to have higher storm energy values than what is portrayed on the models here, but definitely sufficient enough for severe weather here today. As we take a look at your 0 to 1 kilometer storm relative helicity, we don't have much down south, but up to the north here, I would like to note this, we do have some decent values in here that are suitable for tornadoes. And if we can get enough storm energy up there, we could definitely see a tornado risk, and that is our main question. But as we go into the later evening and the early overnight hours here, we are talking around 200 helicity. That is certainly enough to cause tornadoes. Fight. This pen tool would work here. And then continuing on through the night, it increases even more, but you really don't have as much storm energy to work with. And then along the coastline, you see some higher values as well. So the 2% tornado threat is justified. I don't think we're going to see an upgrade to a 5%, though, your environment could support something similar to that later on. Your supercell composite here, there's really not that much to look at. Not much going on down here in East Tennessee and all these areas. The slight risk is a little bit questionable for those areas, I will admit, but you could see some potentially higher supercell composite values along the coast here. And so really today looks like a low-end day, to be completely honest. Just a lot of wind. Now, how about we look at what's next down the pipeline? This is your 500 millibar winds, basically your mid-level winds, and it helps us understand where all of our troughs are, our short waves are located. And you can see right here, we do have a pretty big system coming on down from the Rockies, from Canada here. A looks like more of like a positively tilted trough right here / shortwave, and you do have a very strong jet stream right underneath it, ripping out of the west to the west-northwest right there. And that is going to set the stage for potentially a significant severe weather / tornado outbreak event on Wednesday. Also like to note, we do have sufficient divergence ahead of this as well, so your air is kind of going to be split apart a little bit, and you're going to have a lot of additional air trying to fill in the holes, basically fill in the gaps, and that is going to cause a lot of storm energy, a lot of rising motion in your atmosphere, which will contribute to a higher and severe weather threat. And you can see a nice shortwave kind of right here cutting across, which is going to be the focal point of storm initiation, and that's going to trail on off to the southwest as well. Now let's go ahead and take a look at what the future radar could look like for Wednesday. This is going to be a slightly lower resolution model here, taking a look at the NAM model time through time here, and we are talking about a very volatile environment setting up in shop here. Now, a lot of these values here, and I want to kind of note this, a lot of these values up here are actually elevated. Well, what that basically means is that this would be north of the warm front. If any storms did form up here, it would likely just be wind and hail. You wouldn't see a tornado risk because your storms would not be attached to the surface, and so that's very important. And I kind of don't like the way Aguacero visualizes their supercell composite, but we're going to go with it here. Let's kind of note where your divide is as we head into the evening hours. All of this up here is going to be elevated. None of that is going to be tornadic in nature. I know you see that giant blob there of pink colors and you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is the craziest environment I've ever seen in my entire life. Well, it's north of the warm front, so you're not going to see tornadoes out of that. South of that, though, you can definitely tell along your warm front, along your boundary here, kind of situated right within here, you do have some pretty high-end values right along there, but we're not talking about anything north of that. We're talking about everything off to the southwest of it, right down there. As we advance one more frame forward here, we do have a lot of storm initiation that does take place all along this area right within here, and basically any of those storms in that area area, especially off to the northeast a little bit more, will be suitable for strong to even intense tornado potential. Not a likelihood, but certainly a possibility. And right within here, you can see some pretty good, values of supercell composite. We're going to have to wait and see if we see anything surface-based in here, if we see any open warm sector convection. That could lead to a ton of problems. That will definitely increase your tornado threat. And we're going to look at our parameters now, and I'm just going to go to show you all what would happen if the warm front maybe lifted further north than forecasted. We're looking at our lower level jet here as it kind of comes on through. We do have some pretty elevated values here of lower level winds, upwards of 60 to almost 70 knots. That is a very strong low level jet stream coming into play here, and that will intensify even more. Now, I want you all to all note this. Anything up in this area here is going to be north of the warm front. If we see the warm front go further north and this becomes a surface-based environment, oh boy, we're going to have significant issues up near the Chicago area and really all the same areas that just got hammered a few days ago. We're really focusing on some of these areas right down here where your lower level jet is. That's your surface-based environment. And we're talking about winds between 50 and 60 knots, certainly sufficient enough for strong tornado development. This lower level jet is in response to a very strong, abnormally strong low pressure system up here into Minnesota, a 986 millibar low. You don't typically see this in the month of June that far south, but that is going to be the big player for your strong lower level winds. And you see another low pressure system form right there, and that causes your winds to rip around like that. And believe it or not, there's enough turning with height to where this actually would be sufficient enough for a tornado risk. It might not cluster up as easily as you all might think. We're not talking about unidirectional winds with height. They actually change quite dramatically. It's kind of just a system it tilted on its side a little bit, if you think about it like that. But not to confuse you all, I want to go back in time a little bit. We are going to have this low pressure system over Lake Michigan the day before, and that's going to bring in a cold front right here. You can see your winds coming down like that, and that is really the primary reason as to why this warm sector isn't going to lift that far north, because you have all your influence of your low pressure system still in place right here. You have colder temperatures up there, as you had your northwest flow earlier, which is going to act as a pretty strong barrier and is going to prevent your warm front from lifting north. So we're going to have to monitor the situation for northward trends. And our dew point product here, we are talking about very sufficient dew point values, upwards in the mid 70s, even closing in on the upper 70s up here, almost 80-degree dew points there in southern Iowa. That is certainly going to be sufficient enough for severe weather, significant severe weather indeed. So, this whole entire area shaded in your teal blue, dark blue, even getting into your purple and lavender colors, you need to be on high alert. Onto your storm energy, we do have a lot of it advecting off to the north. Look at that. We're talking almost 4,500 storm energy right within that area there. So you have a pretty good warm sector moving into a very favorable environment. And all along there, take a look at that. Your 3,000 Cape line going really far north, going really far south. A very, very favorable environment for severe weather. I want to note, though, how your storm energy, your really high-end values, do not go that far off to the east. And I'm kind of watching model trends for that, because if this does wind up going a lot further east than forecasted, we're going to have even more problem, because as of right now, your thermodynamics and your kinematics are very displaced from each other, and that is going to lead to maybe a lower ceiling of a severe weather threat. But say if we saw 3,000 to 4,000 Cape extending all the way out here, we would have a much different story, and we would definitely be talking about intense to violent tornado potential in a pretty large area. However, we still could see that as we take a look at our 0 to 1 kilometer or 0 to 3 kilometer helicity. We have a different product from the NAM here. We are talking about extraordinarily high values here, going well off the charts in some areas. Now, again, this is 0 to 3, so your 0 to 1 kilometer would likely be between 700 to 800, maybe 900 in some areas, and that is still absolutely bonkers. You don't typically see values like that. And again, going into the afternoon hours, note kind of where your warm sector would be located, kind of right through here. You do have some of those values there extending into portions of your northern part of your warm sector. So certainly is something to watch out for as we head, later on into the evening, into the overnight. Take a look at that. We do have a ton of spin near Peoria, and even to the south of that, look at Springfield there, some very high values coming on in. And again, oh my gosh, if your warm front lifts any further off to the north, say if it lifts all the way up to around here, we are going to have a much different story. I mean, we will definitely have intense to violent tornado potential, as all of that in that particular scenario would be surface based. And again, I mean, we're way off the charts. We're talking about 1,200 to 1,300 0 to 3 kilometer storm relative helicity, or maybe around 900 to 1,000 0 to 1. That is a very substantial environment. I really hope that warm front can stay far enough south and avoid this powder keg of an environment off to the north. I'm telling you, if anything gets tapped into that, it's gonna be rough. Our supercell composite parameters here, you can see clearly where your warm sector and your cold sector, I guess you could say, is located. And you can see some pretty crazy values all throughout this area here, and even some stuff over here. That is something we need to watch for, especially along the boundary. We're talking supercell composite values above a 20 in some areas, and you saw what that did last time. Look at that, 24 right there. But again, we're going to have to watch how far north that warm front goes. If it goes up there, our values are going to explode exponentially, potentially. Well, I'm not going to say any values because that's not really professional of me to do, but certainly is going to be a much more favorable environment. This alone would support intense tornado potential. You could even see a violent tornado if something rides along the boundary. And this environment continues throughout the night, and it even starts to light up a lot back here as well as your line of broken storms and supercells begins to develop. And with that being said, I hope you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, please be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to my little corner of the weather community, share this video with friends, family on social media, as they may want to know about Wednesday. It looks very significant out there. And also to note, one of the most accurate AI weather models out there does show potentially a high-end event for certain areas, but if it still shows that, I might have to do an emergency upload potentially on Tuesday night. I do have work on Monday and Tuesday, 8-hour shifts, gonna be a little bit of a mess, but if things continue to uptrend, say if we have a day 2 moderate on Tuesday, I'm definitely going to have to do a video then. And with that said, have a wonderful night, everyone, and I'll see you back here soon.